And we're good. Oh, hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm going to talk to you about how to make the most of ADHD in game design. Tools and models for day-to-day efficacy. We'll start with an introduction. That's this. Move on to an overview of ADHD and how it manifests in the office. And then we'll go on to a task model that I developed for this talk. And then we'll look at some examples from my own career, kind of through the lens of my ADHD journey, because I was only diagnosed a couple years ago. Just some housekeeping. Turn your phone sounds off. My phone's back there. Hopefully it's already on silent. But yeah, if you would just take out your phone, just make sure that it's on silent. That'd be great. Next, they've asked me to ask you to rate my session. Good feedback for me, and then they can know how to make the conference better next year. And I will be talking real fast because I have a lot to get through. So I might be glossing over some topics. If you want to chat with me about anything, I'm going to try to leave a lot of time at the end for questions, which is why I'm talking so fast. So if there's anything you see during my talk you want to talk more about, raise your hand, or if we don't have time for that, or if you want to talk in person, I'll be hanging out in the bar after the talk. So come see me. And I'll be around. You can accost me. So why are you here? Why this talk? Well, I'm afraid to say it's not a design talk. So if you're here, like some of my colleagues were hoping to know that it's how to design games for people with ADHD. No, it's more, if you have ADHD, I want you to understand your tasks better. I want you to pick up new tools, maximize your strengths, and work around your weaknesses, which is why I have this thing there. Was anyone overwhelmed by this spreadsheet when you first saw it? Yeah. Does anyone not overwhelmed? Do you know what it is? Yeah, totally different people, not the same people. There's a Pokemon type chart, and Pokemon, like brains, have different strengths and weaknesses, and there's a lot of different types of brains, just like a Pokemon. So that's why I have that here. I'm also here to reassure you, it's not just you, right? It's me too, at the very least. If you don't have ADHD, if you're not a game designer, you might still find you get something out of this talk. So at the very least, you're going to understand us better. You're going to be able to work with us better. And pick up some new tools that maybe work for you, even if you don't have ADHD. We all have human brains, right? They're only a little bit different. So I'll talk about myself for a little bit. My name is Travis. I use the they pronouns. I'm a game designer. I work at Snowden Studios out in Canada, in Ottawa. But before that, I worked as an indie for a bunch of years, and that kind of prepared me for my job here. I say here, but I mean over there. So I have ADHD, as you could guess. I was diagnosed during the pandemic, like I think many of us were. I keep hearing stories. And I've had previous careers, like many of us we have various interests. You know, it's hard to hold our attention for a couple of years. There's me playing Tommy in the musical. So, you know, I come by it honestly, right? These are my parents playing trombone with the Montreal Symphony. I believe they are both undiagnosed, untreated ADHD. And the reason, the way they coped with that for their entire lives was by being musicians, right? And it turns out that music is very stimulating for ADHD people. It has these special conditions where it's like high pressure, there's deadlines, you know, these concerts, and then you have the social pressure. It's very conducive for ADHD brains. Whereas in game design, we end up spending a lot of our time in unstimulating work. And we're going to look at why that's a problem and how to get around it. We don't always have unstimulating work, but that's the one we need to focus on here. So let's look at for a second at ADHD. Starting with what's actually happening in the brain. So here's me contemplating some red bananas, right? They're just like, really, they're good bananas, but they're not what you'd expect to see at a grocery store, because we only sell one type of bananas in the West. But there's actually like millions, or maybe I should say in the North. Anyways, they say that ADHD brains, we can't focus on stuff. It turns out we have like dopamine dysfunction, which is a blanket term for a bunch of different problems. But essentially, we have low baseline dopamine, which means that like when nothing's going on, you kind of feel like you're in a crisis. Like, why? And if you're doing work that's not stimulating, you basically get no reward. Your reward center is kind of messed up a little bit. And the other thing I want to talk about the brain that's relevant to this talk, because there's a lot of things I'm not going to talk about, but the default mode network. Basically, your brain has these different modes that they operate in. Okay, so there's the default mode where you're task seeking, and then when you find a task, you have the task mode that activates. And a normal brain, like so my wife, for example, if my wife is looking for something to do, she'll see, okay, there's the dishes to do. I'll go start the dishes. And her default mode found the thing and shuts down as the task mode network activates, starting doing the dishes. For me, in ADHD brains, you're looking for the thing, I find the dishes, my task mode activates, but my default mode stays on. So I'm still looking for something to do. Like, this is not giving me dopamine. I need something. I need to play a video game right now. It's incredibly hard with all these thoughts racing through your head to actually like do the dishes or any of these like non-challenging tasks. And my kudos to people that actually do their dishes daily. So what's stimulating work for ADHD? Basically, this is William Dodson's work. He looked at ADHD brains. What it says here, the ADHD brain requires, I can do this, right? Requires different types of stimulation to release dopamine required for engagement and motivation. So on this side, we have the importance-based nervous system. So a neurotypical brain might say, that's important, I'm going to do it. And in ADHD, it's completely different. It's like, I don't care what's important. I want stimulation. I want something exciting. I want something challenging, novel, interesting, or urgent. And so what you end up with is basically we cannot focus on a task unless it's interesting, challenging, novel, or urgent. That's the ICNU framework. You can look it up. So that's kind of what one of the building blocks of my task model, which I'll be laying a few of in the next few slides. But so in game design, we often find that our work is interesting, right? We're here to make games. We love games. We're doing novel things, like a game designer's tasks change almost daily sometimes, but definitely monthly. And there's always urgency. If you don't have urgency, probably indie. Challenge ends up being quite variable, right? So even though game design is an incredibly difficult job on a whole, on day-to-day, your tasks are not always challenging to you, right? Next brick, 2 bricks in one, dopamine and willpower. So starting with dopamine, basically this is a neurochemical. This is basically the motivation molecule, and it helps us focus, right? Managing this ends up being the key to survival in the modern world. So where do you get dopamine? Well, stimulating work. Exercise ends up releasing a lot of good dopamine. Copium, which I'll talk about later. Medication and social interaction. So knowing where to get your dopamine is very important. And dopamine kind of leads into willpower. So willpower, what I'm calling strength of spirit, or if you know spoon theory, it could be like spoons. You kind of have limited dopamine willpower per day and per week, and maybe even per lifetime, who knows? And how I'm kind of reckoning with this is that you use your willpower to do work. So the way I think of it is each task has a startup cost and then a sustained cost. And if your work is stimulating, then your costs are going to be lower. So if you have dopamine in your system, it's going to be lower cost. So, and the last brick before I get into my task model is interruptions. So any of you know that like interruptions are bad for productivity, right? The science is pretty clear on this. But let's look at an example from a fictitious workday where you have this big boring task, you need 80 willpower to do it, and you start your day with 100. So just by getting started, you do maybe an eighth of the task, but you spend 10 willpower just doing the thing because it's long and boring. It's hard to get yourself started. So you get a little bit through the task, and then you get an email notification, which forces your brain to switch contexts, uses a bunch of willpower. You do some work on something unrelated, and then you have to go back to what you were doing, and you're at the same spot, but you have 30 less willpower, and now at the end of the day, you're not going to get your task done, right? So how many times have you said, like, oh, I can get this done today, no problem, but then you're half done by the end of the day because of this and this coming up, right? Yeah, exactly. On to the task model. So we've seen this stick before, stimulating, unstimulating, and I have another axis for interruptions. So what you find is you have these 4 quadrants that I find our work tends to fall into pretty well. And we end up spending a lot of our time down here. So, you're going to find one day that your work falls into this quadrant, which means that you're going to have to think about it in a certain way. You're going to have to use different tools compared to if your work the next day is suddenly you're being more interrupted. You have to use a totally different mindset and a totally different set of tools to deal with that. And we're going to look at each quadrant and how to deal with your brain while doing all this work. And I use some movement metaphors. So starting with the best ones, what I call the sweet spot. Stimulating, uninterrupted work, very much like biking downhill. I don't need to tell you how to bike downhill. It's like, that's fun. Like, you're always going to choose that if you had to choose from biking. So basically, low startup costs, low sustained costs. You want to get into this work. You're happy to keep doing it. And your main problem here is actually going to be hyperfixation. So having something in your mind that you need to finish before you can stop working. Priority here for maximizing efficacy is to create a space for yourself. We'll talk about it a bit later. So some examples for me, level design, combat design, scripting, programming, writing, story design, creative development, system design, prototyping. Basically anything that lets you like sit there and do the work and not have to be interrupted by anything. And it's like a fun, big challenge. That's the kind of thing that I can sink my teeth into. Worth noting that you may not find the same list of tasks in your sweet spot category. All these examples for each of these quadrants may be totally different for you than for me. Tips, however, should remain the same. So creating a space, like I said. So when I was working on this platformer game, I had this kind of wraparound desk, right? So I had my monitors on one side, and I had this empty spot with all my papers where I would turn around and do my level design on paper. And it was kind of, just that swivel was enough to separate me and create this nice headspace. Minimize notifications. Very important to get rid of any notification that's going to distract you while you want to stay in the flow, right? You want to use a hyper focus that you hear so much about, which is different from hyperfixation, right? This is where you have something in your head that you need to get out. So an example of this, when I was working on that platformer, we had to do these boss battles. And my dev said made it cool. I didn't really like it, so and it didn't let me do what I wanted to do, which I had to communicate to them by I made a whole boss battle in Unity animations. Like a 2-minute boss battle took me a week to do, which was way too long, and there's no way to iterate on it because it's all like hand pointed like animations. Terrible. But it ended up working because the devs were able to see what I'd made and then make tools that abstract the concepts of what I put into my prototype, and then the new tool was able to, I could make all the boss battles I wanted. So sometimes it worked out, but you have to validate. If you can recognize that you were fixated on something, hyperfixated, it's hard to do, but recognize it and validate, like pitch it to your team. And if they say no, you have to be able to detach your ego and say, okay, it's not the right thing to work on, I'll move on to something else. It's not easy, okay? Another thing is to time box. So if you are working on something, you recognize that you're going too much far in on it, you can time box yourself, say, I'm going to stop at this time or on this date and move on to something else. Go home, right? And if you need to follow through, you just do it, right? At the very least, it'll get it out of your system and you can move on to something else. Overall, work smarter, not harder. So you're spending a lot of energy in this mode, and you want to make sure it's going in the right direction. Because if it's not, you're going to end up totally off base and waste everyone's time. And what we'll find in uninterrupted work is that we want to take longer breaks more often. We want to maximize the time we're spent focusing and minimize the number of times we have to pay startup costs on tasks. So much for that. And we're moving on to labored focus. Staying on the uninterrupted side. This is kind of like biking uphill. Not fun at all. But when you get there, you like look at the hill you just biked up, and then you get to bike down. It's fun. It's not fun, but it's rewarding. So high startup costs. You're not interested in doing this unstimulating work, but once you get going, the moderate sustained cost is not too bad. Your main problem is going to be thoughts like, I want to be doing anything else. And if you can kind of get on top of that, meditation is good for that. That's good, but really prioritize not having notifications so that your thoughts are the only thing trying to take your attention. For me, some examples: data entry, reading some kinds of research and documentation, doing a second pass on a level or a document I find can be very, very taxing. And some tips, so creating a space and minimizing notifications like we saw before. And because it's unstimulating, if we could add AV stimulation. So I often use MyNoise, which is a soundscape generator, or even just having like a picture, some stuff around your desk that gives you some joy. Find some way to to entertain your brain while you're looking at this boring spreadsheet or doc. Deadlines, very important. The tighter the better, in my opinion, as long as it's reasonable, right? And having a daily to-do list, I set myself like mini deadlines by just making a list and saying, this is what I want to accomplish today. And I throw them out at the end of the day. And using momentum. So this is a strategy I came up with when I'm doing really unstimulating work, where basically I'll prepare, break, start. So I'll set up everything I need to do, like open the right pages and stuff like that, so that the only thing I have to do is then get started on the work. I'll take a break, get my dopamine up, and then start on the work. And then I can, and then it feels like the cost of starting that work is a lot lower because I'm already feeling good, right? And again, longer breaks more often. Bouncing now to bouncing around. On the interrupted side, when you're doing stimulating work, to me, it's like biking through the city. I love biking through the city. You know, I'm going like right along traffic there. There's always new things happening. You got to react really fast, and you're always stopping and starting. It's fun, but it's kind of mentally draining. So you end up with a low startup cost, but a moderate sustained cost, because you're paying that low startup cost over and over. And your main problem, well, my main problem here is overwhelm. So dealing with so many tasks and things and conversations at the same time can get really a lot. And so, you know, I close all my tabs and I keep a list. Lists end up being very important in this mode. Some examples for me: design by coordination, where I'm working on a design, but it's not really my job to put what's in it. I have to get information from like 7 or 8 other brains. Running play tests, you might be like literally bouncing around. Juggling tasks, you know, especially near the end of production, I find you end up having like 3 or 4 things you're working on at the same time. Some kinds of analysis and investigation, some kinds of learning of new tools can be this kind of work. And tips, basically break down complex tasks in lists, right? But, you know, I often look at a task, I'm like, I don't know at all how I'm going to solve this, but I can just break it down step by step. You know, the first step is like do investigation. It helps. And then each time I finish a step, I put done in the line, or however you want to keep track of that. And again, keeping lists. What are you doing today? And as well, if I'm going to be doing the same stuff tomorrow morning, I'm going to just leave like a list of all the stuff I was doing, and then it makes it easier to start the next day. On the interrupted side, we're going to want to take short breaks more often. So find something that you can do for 3-4 minutes. Maybe the Pomodoro technique is good here. Yeah, we're going to look at what to do on your little break in a moment. And finally, the worst one, actually painful work. I mean, like, it activates pain centers in your brain. I love this picture, right? This woman is so miserable. She's got her phone in her hand. You know, this hammock is not going to be used today. I can tell you that. And yeah, this is really how it feels. Your feet are cold. You have a high startup cost and a really high sustained cost because you're paying that high startup cost over and over. And your main problem here ends up being motivation. I don't want to do this work. And your priorities, recharge and find whatever you need to get your stuff back. Your sanity. Sanity is hard to come by these days. Some examples for me: data entry and some documentation, right? Usually unstimulating for me, but not everyone. Creation in a slow engine. So like when I've done my paperwork already and I now have to implement the game into the level, the level into the game, and the tools are working against me, like I'm waiting every 5 seconds, it can be very painful. Some kinds of analysis, some kind of learning can be very painful as well. None of these tips are going to be new. So we've seen unstimulating and interrupted work. So adding AV simulation, keeping lists, doing short breaks more often, and using momentum. Basically, get through your day, just whatever you can, and don't be too hard on yourself, because you're not going to be that productive. So looking back at our 4 quadrants, we have sweet spot, labored focus, bouncing around, and actually painful. I could end my talk here, but I'm going to go through how this kind of manifests throughout my career in my journey. Looking back at my career through the lens of ADHD, some notable successes and coping mechanisms. Starting with Act 1, the runner game. It's not Bit Trip Runner, but it's very much inspired by it. This was my first industry job. I'm ready. It ends up being kind of perfect for me. The challenge was great. I had very few interruptions. The timeline was super tight. It was very urgent. and the team was small, this fast iteration cycle. All this made it just like the perfect project. Does anyone else here have that project in your mind where it's like, if all my projects could just be like that one, my career would be so good? I see nods, like yes. And I had to look back at this and say, like, why was I so successful, right? I had all these things working against me. I was undiagnosed. I had no industry experience. Right? I was working indie for a while, and I had this tight timeline. But I managed to blow through it and do really, really well because I had all these things going for it, right? The job was very novel. I love platformers. This is very much in my wheelhouse. The time pressure was significant. I was well prepared. I had all the skills I needed in terms of teamwork and unity. My team was great, and we worked well together. And I had trees around my office, like in my window, which ended up being really, really good for ADHD concentration. So all that made for kind of sweet spot work, where in other conditions it could have been spending time, wasting brain power, which I had to use every single ounce of my brain power to get this done on time. Yes. So what I learned from this game, basically do what you love. My dad always told me, do what you love and the money will follow. So I didn't get a job right away in the industry. I wanted to be indie, so I did that. And it prepared me for this, well, at the time, kind of a small studio. Make your own luck. So I consider myself very lucky. This is a perfect job for me. But on the other hand, I was out there. Like I was meeting everyone in the Ottawa game scene that I could in order to get this job that was never even posted, right? So I had to be in the right place at the right time, but I had to like go to that place and make an active effort to be as many places as I could. Play to your strengths. Like I love platformers. Like if you like platformers, work on those. That's what I did in my spare time. Ended up getting me this job. Very important. Some days are not productive. I had to learn this the hard way, where I get to a day on maybe week 3, I'm just like I can't brain right now. And then one of my artist friends, like the very same second, was like, "Do you ever have those days where you just can't art? Just like can't do anything?" I'm like, "Yes, that's happening to me right now." And you end up having other days that are like super productive. And important not to like hold yourself to either standard, right? Understand that it all kind of regresses to the mean, as it were. And it turns out that your support needs for your ADHD are lower if your work is stimulating and you're getting what you need. Surprise, surprise, because I was able to get through this whole project and not even realize I had ADHD, right? On the other hand, looking at the next, skipping ahead a couple years to the dungeon project, it was very stressful. Despite being a fantasy dungeon crawler, which I love, doing level design is really, really sweet and an interesting IP. I was really excited to work on this project, but it turns out that the level design possibility space was actually really low. So the challenge was low. So there was less stimulating work. The tools were working against me every single day. And the production didn't seem to care that my tools were bad. They're like, why? It works, it does the thing. It's like, no, but I'll make you a whole spreadsheet, show you how much money you're losing from these bad tools. Anyways, the whole thing it could have been a sweet spot project, but it ended up being really, really painful a lot of the time. And this is where I really learned to use copium at work. So I'm defining it here as any activity, substance, or belief that helps you get through some tough time. So let's say you're stressed out, right? Your work is unstimulating. You have a lot of interruptions. Your brain's a mess. You end up with low dopamine. You feel like you're in a crisis. Low willpower, which means you have low productivity. Copium has the aim, at least, of raising your dopamine, right? And then, as we've seen, the dopamine goes up, your willpower costs go down, so you're able to do more in your day. However, if your copium is too intense, like if you're playing a video game, like an action game on your little breaks, your willpower costs are going to go up because you're actually pumping yourself so full of dopamine that the idea of going back to a task that is less stimulating is abhorrent to your brain. It's like, no, why would I stop playing this game? This is good. Work is bad. So we're looking for something that's moderately stimulating, that's always available, and that's limited. So maybe like what I do is watch Slay the Spire videos. I've seen many of them, and it's just like they're just like going through runs. So like on a minute-to-minute basis, it can be kind of boring. So I could just like, okay, shut that off now, get back to my work. But there's like so many of them that I'll never run out. Avoid highly addictive, heart-pumping, and compelling things like TV tropes. Good and bad. So some examples. This is Ryan Letourneau, Northern Lion, a streamer that I often watch on YouTube as my copium. He actually taught me the word copium. Chatting with your friends, instant message can be great. I did a lot of cafe runs with my colleagues almost every day. Doing physical activity, I have an asterisk here because sometimes like your copium should not cost willpower to use. And so if you love like lifting weights, fucking great, go for it. I'm sorry, swearing. It's not really for me. So food and snacks, I try not to eat garbage on my little breaks, but sometimes that's what it takes. And reading, as long as you don't get sucked in, right? Just experiment, right? It has to be reasonable. So all this in service of getting through waiting periods. So sometimes you're working in your engine, you have to wait. So I've identified kind of 3 scales of waiting. I found that with small weights and medium weights, like I haven't found anything better than just like opening a YouTube video that I could just like switch to, get my dopamine high, and then when I have to stop waiting, the thing's done, I go back, right? This is when I'm waiting like multiple times per day, and like there's nothing else to do but wait. And if I'm waiting for 5 seconds, it already feels excruciating, right? But if you have a longer wait, like 5 minutes, not really enough to get in another task, but when you have 20 minutes, 60 minutes, then you really need something else to do. On this project, I actually had 2 repos where I would start a process that had to like go for 60 minutes or something and switch the other repo, do another task. Crazy. So what I learned from this project, grow towards your ambition. So it wasn't all painful, actually. I ended up doing a lot of narrative design and story design, which I loved, and a lot of writing, which was actually quite sweet work. Only because I recognized on the project there was only one writer on the whole, like it's a narrative game. So I offered, hey, I'm a writer. Do you need help with writing? I would love to do anything but level design on this project. And he was like, yeah, I definitely need help. So I went as far as like being part of the core creative team just because I'm putting myself out there and using the skills I had. Find your copium, like we were just talking about. You're sensitive, use it. So ADHD tends to come with a higher level of emotional sensitivity. Be aware of this. Like if something bothers you, talk to somebody, right? Your team is there to help you. Your managers, your bosses are there to help you. And they really need to be able to make accommodations for you. So anything that's like, man, this is bothering me every day, talk to somebody, please. Including request better tools. When I made that spreadsheet showing the producers how much money they were losing, it actually ended up working. Too late, but it's still good. And it's just painful work is painful. There's nothing going around it. Moving on to the sport game. So this project to me ended up being a lot of labored focus and a lot of bouncing around. So I started doing research and UX design, which doing the same like screen over and over was like, I'm done. My brain's done this. So like, the novelty quickly wears off on that. Resulting in labored focus. But later on, I really like being in the bouncing around mode, actually. So designing by coordination and a lot of copying, working in this old engine. It was a lot of fun. So COVID happened. We were already mid-pandemic when I was assigned this project. But COVID really, I was isolated, I was going insane. And I didn't know why. And then that's when I started learning about ADHD. At length, I got diagnosed and medicated. So let's talk about medication. I don't know if this is a common experience, but I know at least myself and a couple other people have thought, I don't know, should I start medication? Like there's like shame around it, there's like doubt. But I'll just tell you my experience, all right? As we've seen, dopamine decreases willpower costs, and that's basically the goal of stimulant medication. So amphetamines or methylphenidate does this, and it doesn't have the risk of like supercharging dopamine like it does with a video game, for example. It had great side effects for me, reducing my anxiety. I was like highly anxious one day, and the next day I was not at all, back to normal. It was great. A lot of the like mental noise and self-criticism has also gone down, which is really nice. It does, I'm very dehydrated. I had to drink a lot of water, and sometimes you can risk getting overstimulated. But anyways, it's hard to predict, right? Everyone's going to react differently, and overall, I say give it a try if you have the opportunity and if you have the desire. Virtual Scrum happened during pandemic. I found it extremely hard to concentrate, as I'm sure many of you did, even if you don't have ADHD. So this is a still from a series of videos that I would play during Virtual Scrum and have my meeting on one screen and this like animated kaleidoscope color thing on the other screen. And like the visual hypnotism was able to allow me to actually pay attention to the meeting a lot better. Fidget toys, anything. It doesn't have to be like a branded fidget toy or whatever. Just like something to play with your hands. And honestly, tune out during some updates. Like there's 10 people in my scrum. I know 2 of them are going to say something interesting to me, but the rest, even if I pay attention and hurt myself trying to listen, I'm not going to retain any of it. So I just tune out. And then when I hear someone's voice that, okay, they're actually going to say something relevant, I'll stop what I'm doing, go back. It's no offense to my colleagues, but like they do the same to me, I'm sure. Sports. So what I learned from this game, working from home sucks, for me anyway. It's not for everyone. People end up being my copium, right? That's why I was going insane. I'm used to going to work and having hugs, seeing people I know, smiles. This releases dopamine. I needed that. If I was in the theater, I didn't know I was treating my own ADHD. My walk to work ends up being very important for my dopamine production. And I have all sorts of added temptations at home, which increase willpower costs because I'm like working against like, no, I can't play video games. If you're gregarious like me, use it. Talk to your teammates. I went out of my way to book meetings with my teammates that I never met in real life because we're all remote now. Even when I'm back in office, most of my team is remote anyway. But so I had to like do these little chats, like nothing chats, not business or anything. Get to know the people I'm working with. And the more I did that, the more I kind of got a picture of all the people that's working on my project. And I have here, be the source, right? Which is a piece of wisdom I got where if someone asks you a question, if you don't know the answer, at least try to provide that person with the answer, even if you don't have it. I have such a good picture of my studio now, of my project, that anyone asks me any question, I can point them to someone that knows better. And I think that's really good for you, for your relationships, and for the project in general, because you're kind of lubricating these pathways of knowledge that need to move if your project's going to flow properly. And it's related to learn the studio machine. So when I started on this project, with my first AAA game, I had no idea how different it was to get an idea from conception out to production, right? Has anyone else had that realization? Like, wow, this project's way bigger than I realized. And like, I've done all this work, but nobody's listening, right? And that's what happened to me. I looked at these different features in this game. I was like, this could be better. And I made these little UX designs and I showed them to a bunch of people and they're like, oh, that's really cool. But those people didn't matter. I didn't even know that there were people I needed to get excited. Like there was like senior leadership that I need to talk to them, get them excited. And then they could okay a plan that would get production involved, right? So yeah, the better you understand the machine of your studio, the better you have. The better you can work in your product. Finally, but not leastly, production support or manager support. I found it happened like earlier this year, at the beginning of the year, where I was assigned a producer, and my company is like more like a manager or a lead. Anyways, this is someone that's managing my tasks in ADO, and suddenly I was able to just like, hey, someone asked me about this thing, and gave me this task. I didn't have to keep track of it myself. I could just like copy the message that person sent to me and give it to my producer. And then they would create a task in Jira or whatever, and it would arrive on my list, right? So what we're trying to avoid is context switching, right? I'm working on this thing, and someone's coming to me with interruptions, requests. I need a way of handling those requests that doesn't break my flow. And so for me, it's amazing that I can just like copy paste and send to my producer. If you don't have that in your work life, 10 minutes left. Okay, perfect. If you don't have that, then you have to come up with your own system, right? A filtering system maybe where you have like a lightweight way of usually maybe you just copy the message and you put it in a doc, and then at the end of the day you process other things in that doc into Jira, something like that. Anyways, find ways to limit the breaking of your focus. Reduce cognitive load. Very important. So that's most of my talk. Just going through another few points. Learn about your brain. Do the research. If you have ADHD, if you have nonverbal learning disorder, any number of different types of brain, learn about how you operate, because we're all unique, and experiment, right? Figure out what works for you, what doesn't work, and seek help. If you can, I recommend that everybody have a psych assessment to understand your brain better. I think it should be mandatory for everybody and paid for by the government multiple times in your life. but that's just my socialist self. Categorize your tasks. So what mode are you going to be in for each of your tasks? You have to make up your own categories, great. And expand your toolbox. So I have a few here, but there's many others that you can find online or invent yourself. So I have, use momentum when you're doing something unstimulating, find your copium when you have a lot of interruptions, adding stimulation, and request accommodations. Please, it's really hard sometimes to think of what you use. For example, I recognized that I needed like something to eat, something to consume at the end of the day, and I was doing a lot of chips and stuff. But it'd be really ideal if I could have a smoothie. So I asked my producer to get me a blender, like a good blender, where I could keep frozen fruit in the freezer and then just like make a smoothie in the afternoon. He did, and now I have smoothies whenever I want at work, it's amazing. So like weird little things like that, it can help a lot. And that's basically it. Thank you very much. So now, any questions? Anyone that want to expand? Yes, and we have send the mic over here. Hi.
Hi. Hi, great talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
One of the problems I often come across is I'll identify a task or like an initiative or something that I know is going to be, once I'm in the flow of things, I know it's going to be really stimulating and empowering, rewarding, or it'll generate a lot of value for other people. But I struggle like getting off the starting block, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you've got any like top tips for just getting over that initial hurdle.
Yeah, well, it depends on what the type of work is, right? But finding momentum, doing easy things first, it's often kind of a big complex task, right? So I would break it down. I would write every single step, no matter how inane. You write it down in a list, and what it does in your brain is chunking, right? Like instead of having this one amorphous epic task that you don't know how to approach, break it down. So if I'm doing level design, right, it's just like this. How do you do like level design is kind of like you can sit there, you can go into the editor and just like start placing stuff, but you're not going to do level design. You're just going to it's like almost improvised. It's not going to be good. What you need to is create material, right? I would do little building blocks, or what are the atomic units of challenge that I'm going to apply to my level? Like, what are the 1 2 by 2 meter blocks that I'm going to put my player against, and then create a library of those. And then I already have like a set of restrictions that I'm working within, right? Set yourself restrictions. That's a good one. Yeah. Over here. Hello.
Sorry, I definitely needed a microphone because my voice is going. Amazing presentation. Thank you so much. I found it really not only useful and insightful, but also very entertaining. So thank you for that. So my name's Hattie. I'm a game producer,
okay.
And in my team and my colleagues, some of them have ADHD, recognize and they know about it, and they already have tools and tips. But I was thinking, as a manager, you've already given tips, about helping to filter out interruptions for maybe for your colleagues or your employees. But is there anything that maybe any good manager you've had really helped, like something that was super useful for you that helped, especially with like task management and like giving when you need, as a manager, when I need my team to do stuff, and we know they have ADHD and they could maybe struggle to actually come to that item in the list. How can I motivate them to do it?
Reminders.
Okay.
So I have no problem being poked by someone who says like, hey, just making sure this is on your radar, like it's due in 2 days or whatever. Something like that. Knowing what kind of work to assign your ADHD people. Like in my brain, it doesn't make sense to, like, if your employee with ADHD is underperforming, don't give them easier work. It's not going to help. They're just going to be less and less excited about the work, right? So give them harder work. Push them outside of the comfort zone. Make them think hard, and that's going to make them excited. Give them something challenging so that they can really get into the work, but not too challenging, right? Because it's always, that flow stream where you want to be like work that's appropriately challenging, but then your skill gets up. Right? Ask them. Just ask them, what do you need? How can I help you? Right? getting emotional now. My producer, sometimes it feels like he's listening to me. It's very emotional.
You're honestly super brave, and you've got so much courage to share with us, like what you've gone through. I just want to applaud that.
Because it can be really hard, and it feels like no one understands. And then when someone on your team shows you that they really do understand, it helps a lot.
A big hug to you, virtually. Okay.
Yeah.
Just one last thing.
sorry,
Actually, could you go back to the slide where we can download the slides? Yes, please.
Thank you. Yeah. Sorry, that's
yeah, that's really practical. Thank you.
QR code. You can scan that to get slides. Yes, a microphone just over there.
Oh my God, Hi. I'm really nervous. My question is a bit personal, actually. One thing that I'm really anxious about is masking and being open about ADHD and stuff. And I was just wondering if you would have any advice, even if it's just mask, like that's totally fine. I'm receptive to that. But yeah, like I feel like there is a lot of stigma, and what you said really resonated with me a lot. I feel like I have to push myself harder and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm getting off track. Essentially, masking. That was my question.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky because you never know who you have to know who you're working with, right? I would say if you're uncomfortable sharing, find a safe space to share with people. And it's hard, right? So you have to stay in that flow zone, right? You have to be pushing yourself, challenging yourself, but not too much, right? If your workplace is not the right place for now, go somewhere else, right? Introduce yourself to new people and tell them you have ADHD, right? Strangers are maybe less threatening than people you have to see every day, right? And another thing you could do is tell one person at a time, right? Maybe you make a list of the people that you would like to know, and rate them from easiest to hardest, and do it that way. I think this is getting destigmatized further and further. I don't know. It is hard, but maybe if you can find an ally too, someone else in your studio probably is going through the same thing, maybe. So I don't know. We can talk about this later if you want.
Thank you. Yeah.
If you come talk to me, I can give you my card. We're done. Okay, sorry. Sadly, we're running out of time, but thank you everyone for coming, and come talk to me later.